The next candidate who also qualifies for nomination for election to the membership of the East Africa Legislative Assembly, Ms. Zipporah Kering of ID number 7445968. We have looked at your documentation, and as presiding officers, we are satisfied that your documentation meets the requirements of the rules. Therefore, we will proceed to issue a certificate to Ms. Zipporah Kering of ID number 7445968. It's a provisional certificate. Ms. Kering.
Majority Leader, it is presumptuous of you to remain there. The next candidate you have presented to us, Mr. Godfrey Maina Mwangi of ID number 310-27730. Having looked at the documentation that has been presented to us in respect of this candidate, we, the presiding officers, have ascertained that the documentation has complied with the requirements, and we accordingly issue a provisional certificate of nomination for this candidate, Godfrey Maina Mwangi.
The next candidate who was presented to us is one Joel Okengo Nyambane of ID number 278-26094. And having looked at the documentation submitted to us against the rules, we, the presiding officers, we are satisfied that Mr. Joel Okengo Nyambane of ID number 278-26094 meets the requirements for purposes of nomination for an election to the East Africa Legislative Assembly. Therefore, we will proceed to issue a provisional certificate to Mr. Joel Okengo Nyambane.
The next candidate presented to us, and in respect of whose papers we have considered, is Mr. Frederick Muteti Charles. And having considered the documentation provided to us, we are satisfied that this candidate has complied with the rules, and is therefore, we wish to issue him with a provisional certificate of nomination for election to EALA.
The next candidate who was presented to us is one Falhada Deko Iman of ID number 22399-216, and having looked at the documentation submitted to us against the rules, we, the presiding officers, are satisfied that Ms. Falhada Deko Iman satisfies the requirements for nomination for election to the membership of the East Africa Legislative Assembly, and therefore we will proceed to issue Ms. Falhada with a provisional nomination certificate. Ms. Falhada.
Okay. This one? We have looked at the nomination papers presented in respect of the Honorable David Ole Sankok of ID number 20634336. Has complied with the requirements of the rules, and we accordingly would like to issue a provisional certificate of nomination for election to the East African Legislative Assembly. Okay.
The other candidate who was presented to us is Senator Hassan Omar Hassan of ID number 1366-3076. And again, having looked at the documentation against the rules of nomination, we, the presiding officers, have satisfied ourselves that Senator Hassan Omar Hassan of ID number 1366-3076 meets the requirements for nomination for election to the membership of the East Africa Legislative Assembly. Therefore, we will proceed to issue him with a provisional nomination certificate. Mheshimiwa Hassan.
Governor. The nomination papers of the Honorable Abdikadir Omar Aden have been examined, and we are satisfied that these papers have complied with the requirements of the rules, and we accordingly wish to issue a provisional certificate of nomination for election to the East African Legislative Assembly in respect of the Honorable Abdikadir Omar Aden, ID number 13116397. This is
also presented to us as presiding officers is one Ms. Anne Cherono To of ID number 11723978, and having looked at her nomination papers against the rules, we, the presiding officers, we are satisfied that she meets the requirements for purposes of nomination for election to the East Africa Legislative Assembly, and therefore we will proceed to issue her with a provisional nomination certificate. Ms. Cherono.
Get a provisional nomination in respect of Mr. Jonas Misto Vincent Kuko, whose papers we have examined, and we therefore proceed to issue the certificate. Mr. Jonas Misto Vincent Kuko.
For Honorable Cyprian Kubai Ringo of ID number 160-14705, and we, the presiding officers, having looked at the nomination papers against the rules, we are satisfied that the nomination papers comply with the rules. Therefore, we will proceed to issue Honorable Kubai with nomination papers for purposes of election as a member of the East Africa Legislative Assembly. Honorable Kubai.
Okay. Honour Clerk. Thank you.
As the presiding officers, we have perused the papers presented in respect of Ms. Lillian Chepto Tomitom, and we are satisfied that the requirements of the rules have been met in respect of this candidate, and we therefore wish to issue a certificate of provisional nomination.
We have also looked at nomination papers for one Yasser Ali Sheikh of ID number 137811573, and we, the presiding officers, we are satisfied that the nomination papers looked against the rules of nomination meet the requirements. Therefore, we will proceed to issue a provisional certificate to Mr. Yasser Ali for purposes of election to the East Africa Legislative Assembly. Mr. Yasser.
As the presiding officers, we have perused the papers presented in respect of Mr. Salim Mohammed Busaidi of ID number 1017378, and we have ascertained that the requirements of the rules have been met in respect of this candidate, and we therefore wish to issue a provisional certificate of nomination for Mr. Salim Mohammed Busaidi.
Thank you, presiding officers. Just to thank the presiding officers and the staff for taking us through this exercise in line with the rules of EALA, and also take this opportunity to confirm that the Kenya Kwanza Alliance has complied with the rules in terms of nomination and even in terms of gender balance. We have endeavored to ensure that there is also regional balance of our nominees. We wish all the 15 nominees all the best as they embark on their campaigns for election, as at when the presiding officers allow them access to Parliament to be able to speak to members of Parliament to campaign. and we wish them all the best.
Thank you.
Well, I also want to appreciate the presiding officers, together with the parliamentary secretariat, who've followed all the attendant EALA protocols to ensure that we have a smooth nomination exercise. Kenya Kwanza as a coalition has nominated 15 nominees. We present them to Parliament of Kenya, both houses, to sell their ideas and manifesto on how we can have a more cohesive and more progressive East African community. EALA is a very important legislative body of the EAC, and I believe our nominees are all of them equally gifted and competent to make sure that EALA achieves its objectives. So I wish the nominees well as they campaign the next few days up to the day of election. And I believe we'll have a good election on that day and send competent men and women to represent us as Kenya in EALA. Thank you, presiding officers.
Thank you. And thank you, candidates, for your patience.